Welcome back to Seeing Wonder, and on this episode of Design Review, we're looking at the Exosuit from District 9. And if you're new to this channel, we review and discuss geeky design work in movies and video games with a focus on sci-fi. Overall, the design of this exosuit is cool. It definitely has a distinct and unique look to it when you compare it to other exosuit and mech designs, and I think they successfully made it feel alien. But it's not quite as cool as I remember it. Going back to District 9 has been interesting to me. I just watched the movie again recently, and I hadn't seen it since it first came out, and that was just as I was starting to learn about design. I'm definitely seeing the exosuit now with different eyes. It has a ton of really awesome details in it, but some of the overall shapes and proportions I'm not a huge fan of. The arms are a great example of just tons of awesome details, and it looks like the exosuit is using handheld weapons mounted to the arms, which is kind of a cool idea. I like how these mounted weapons look like they're swappable, like they're kind of interchangeable. It looks like there's different weapons on each arm. I've heard that Neil Blomkamp, the director of this movie, loves guns, and that really shows in his movies, especially in District 9. Lots of creative weapon designs in District 9. The exosuit also has these shoulder missile launchers, which are perfectly placed at the tops of the arms, and a cool addition to the exosuit's arsenal. I do like what's going on in the shoulders, where it's got these bundles of wire. It's almost like muscle fiber. It's also a good way to hide some unresolved articulation. You don't really have to design or explain the joints in these areas. You can just have these bundles of wire kind of cover it up. The legs have this articulation and this configuration of the joints. That's kind of this classic posture in mech design. It reminds me of the hind legs of a cat. It feels like there's this potential for this explosive energy with legs that look like this. And there's just something pleasing about this kind of setup of these joints. Similar to the arms, there's just tons of awesome mechanical details in the legs. And just lots of nice little touches in the design and in the animations. These cylinder shapes in the feet are cool. It's like they have a piston loaded inside that can shoot a spike into the ground to give the exosuit more stability. And you get a bit of an indication of that in the movie when there's a close-up of the foot and you can see some animation happening in those pistons. The shape of these leg shields is really cool. Nice sci-fi shape here, some cool details. But I find the placement of it to be a little bit clunky and awkward. Feels like they might get in the way of movement and get caught on things. This is the only kind of shielding like this we see in the design. And it might have worked a bit better if we saw a reuse of this kind of shielding somewhere else, like in the shoulders beside the missile launchers. Because the way it is now, they feel a little bit out of place, and I just don't see why this part of the exosuit would need extra shielding. And regarding the legs and the limbs, this isn't so much a critique of the design, but when you see the exosuit in motion, it just feels a little bit clunky and awkward the way it moves. One thing that's a common issue in CG and visual effects in movies is that things feel like they don't have a realistic amount of weight to them. They feel too light. But in this case, it feels almost like they've given the exosuit too much weight, and when we see it moving and running around, it just feels like it's lumbering a bit. It's not all that graceful. The head and neck area is super cool. I love all these shapes here, these interlocking panels. They look cool and they allow for some movement in the neck. And then these armor and these plating pieces have some cool designs to them that I like as well. And having the head and the neck move like this makes the exosuit design feel more unique, and also helps it feel a bit more alien, and gives it a bit more expressiveness as well. And the way some of the plating moves around is a really nice touch. The way it's animated helps breathe some life into the design, and along with the movement of the head and the neck, makes the exosuit much more expressive. And all these antennas or sensors on the top are a really cool touch as well. They're simple, but they add some nice variety to the details in this exosuit. And the overall shape of the head is cool, and lots of cool details in the face of it here. But I'm not a fan of these kind of tentacle things coming out of the face. I think it makes for way too much of a literal parallel to the prawns, the alien species in this movie that created the exosuit, and that normally pilots it. And the torso is where I think I have the most criticism. The section where the pilot is sitting inside of the exosuit just has an overall weird shape to it. Feels like when they were designing the exosuit, they were too married to a specific position of the pilot, where the pilot would sit down with their legs in front of them, like you might see in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. And so that results in this kind of awkward, tapered protrusion shape. Reminds me of the end of a banana. And the way it sticks straight out from the body in this specific spot feels a bit weird. I'm gonna have to edit all this out, aren't I? It reminds me of the design of Jehuti from Zone of the Enders, which is a really awesome mech design if you can get past the placement of the cockpit. The cockpit section of the exosuit isn't nearly as flagrant, but it just seems a bit odd to me, and I just don't see a reason why the pilot has to sit in this position, which then dictates the shape of the exterior. So it feels like the position of the pilot compromises the design to a certain extent. You might expect more of a standing position in an exosuit like this. To me, an exosuit is more something that's like an exoskeleton that goes around a person's body, as opposed to a vehicle or a mech that someone would sit inside of. And the shape of the cockpit section contributes to this kind of slouching feel and look of the exosuit, like it doesn't have good posture, but it does make it feel alien, like it's something that's not from this world, which is probably more important in the end in this case. One thing that's interesting is there's a lot of really nice mechanical details in the limbs and in the neck and the head, with a lot of angular shapes, but then in the midsection, things get a lot more rounded and organic in feel and shape, especially in the chest where there's this kind of flabby breastplate. So I'm not sure why there was this change up in aesthetic and form, but only for this midsection here. Another thing that makes it feel like the exosuit doesn't have the best posture, and maybe is even a bit out of shape. And to me, these are shapes that really stand out as being out of place, and not fitting with the rest of the design. You don't see the back of the exosuit a lot in this movie, but there's some cool details I wanted to point out here. It looks almost like there's kind of these thruster sections on the back. If these are thrusters, it's almost like they could fire off to help the exosuit jump higher. But they're cool shapes, nice details, and I also like this spinal column detail on the back as well. More interlocking mechanical segments that allow for some movement and flexibility, executed nicely here. So overall, I do think the exosuit is a cool design, even if it's not quite as cool as I remember it. Lots to talk about, and it was fun revisiting this after over a decade since I'd last seen it. If you learned something on this episode of Design Review and want to see more, please subscribe. This channel is new and your support really helps in these early days. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Seeing Wonder.